Welcome everybody. Really great to have you back joining us for our final session of day one of our virtual conference 2023. For those who didn't see me at the start, I'm Geri Sumpter. I'm the head of BU delivery at Beyond Blue, and I'm delighted to be joined by two of my peers. This is Louis and Tina. So Louis, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Geri. Hi, everyone. My name's Louis Hamlyn-Harris, and I am the BU Executive Manager for Early Childhood Australia. I've got a page full of notes, so I'm really excited to reflect on the conference today.
And Tina?
Yes, hi, I'm Tina Martin. I'm the BU Strategic Relationships Manager, and I've really enjoyed today, Louis. So I'm like you, I've got lots of notes, and I'm sure everybody out there has too. So let's have a good conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. So as Louis and Tina have alluded to there, we are here for a conversation, bit of reflection on what we've heard today. And also open to getting your questions. So if you do have a question for us, please feel free to put that in the chat, and we'll try to answer a few as we go through our session this afternoon, but also we'll be able to get back to you with any that we don't get the opportunity to feedback on immediately. Before we do get started with this next session, I just wanted to briefly mention around our virtual booths. So the virtual booths are a new opportunity that we put forward through the conference this year. I understand they have been extremely busy, which is a very exciting prospect. Those virtual booths are that opportunity for you to speak directly with one of our BU consultants and ask them a question. I think there's been as I said, it's been busy in there. So if you were trying to join one of our virtual booths and you didn't get the chance to speak to a consultant, our team are going to put a link in the chat to an opportunity for you to pop your question into our website so that we can again take that question and allow a consultant to feed back to you personally with the answer to that question. So nobody misses out. I'm sorry if you didn't get the chance to pop into the booth, but please feel free to still ask your questions, and hopefully that's gone into the chat for you. One other thing to point out with the booth is that you enter the booth by clicking on one of the yellow banner that you might see in your timeline page on your access to the conference. Clicking into a session, that's through a white banner. So the booths are the yellow banner, the sessions are the white banner. So please be mindful of which you click in. So we want you to make sure that you're getting the right opportunities at the right time as well. And if you've got any more questions about the booth, please feel also free to pop that into the chat. So Louis and Tina, let's reflect on what we've heard today. So there's been a lot that kind of really helps us think about what our Thrive plans might be for ourselves and for the learning communities that we're associated with. So the first sort of point for reflection is around recognizing our individual and collective needs and what it takes for a whole learning community to thrive. So Louis, I'll throw to you to start with. What's your reflection?
Yeah, I really enjoyed Dr. Kellyanne's session at the beginning. I think kicking off a conference like this by talking about belonging is actually a really kind of powerful stake in the ground. Belonging is such an important concept in early childhood. Obviously, our early years learning framework is called, belonging being becoming. And I think part of what committing to belonging is about, it's about saying that childhood, early childhood, young adulthood is a stage of life, right? It's actually not just preparation for university, for what's next for the workforce. But I was really struck, and I'm curious your thoughts, Tina, some of the feedback that Dr. Kellyanne shared, I found really fascinating. For example, that the #1 self-reported driver of young people's well-being in school contexts was teacher support, educator support. Did that catch you off guard a little bit?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised, Louis, and certainly thinking about it in the context of teenagers, we always say their peers are the more important group. And so for me, I thought, oh, that was interesting because that didn't come up, like the teacher engagement or the teacher support was higher than their peers, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, really interesting. And I was reflecting as well with Tina and Louis earlier in saying that my daughter's just transitioned from school where she felt a very strong sense of belonging, and I could see it through all of the factors that Dr. Kellyanne mentioned. And now has transitioned to university where some of those factors have been taken away for her, and she's having to re-find her belonging. And I'm actually now glad that I've got a name for what's happening with her. Right. It's quite nice to, can go away and have that conversation with her, and she's transitioned on as well. So important what we have to consider in this space.
It's that important reminder about voice, right? I think Kellyanne did such an important job of bringing children and young people's voices into the conversation, and the answers we get aren't always what we expect. The other thing that jumped out to me is when Dr. Kellyanne threw to the group and asked the audience to share what promotes their sense of belonging. There's a real theme in the responses around this sense of a connection to something bigger than ourselves. Julia Gillard talked about a connection to purpose. And it made me reflect, sometimes we think about well-being as doing less, about, taking it easy, relaxing. And sometimes it obviously is, right? If your workload is way too high, you probably do need to do less. But we also know that drivers of well-being include things like job satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of meaning. Caroline talked about, a human right to a meaningful occupation. So yeah, really interesting, multi-dimensional ways of thinking about belonging and well-being.
I think the other thing for me was that importance of the educators.
Yes.
Their role in this as sort of, the coordinators, the watchers, the kind of ones that bring it all together. And often I think as children get older, as an educator, you might feel like you've got less impact or less involvement, but in actual fact, I think it's probably greater based on some of the conversations that have happened today. And we shouldn't lose sight of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to what she was talking about at the start, where she was talking about the even babies and those very young children, and creating those opportunities for belonging for them, and how that plays out. So, Louis, I'm interested in your thoughts around that.
Yeah, well, that's attachment theory, right? Like we explore the world because we have a secure base to come back to. So yeah, I mean, such a central idea. And I loved some of the really practical things she talked to, right? We can actually have a dialogue with a pre-verbal child, with an infant, with a very young child, right? But we need to approach that interaction a little differently. Probably need to slow down a little bit. We need to leave some tarry time. Someone in the chat was talking about the kind of serve and response way of thinking about interactions. So again, I think actually probably we've got a lot to learn from educators who work with infants and toddlers about that how central belonging is, I think, to our ability to connect with others, but also to be able to go out into the world and kind of make it our own. Yeah.
And, we know that relationships are really important in our ability to be resilient. And while it was a fantastic presentation by Caroline around what resilience is and what it means for us, but fundamentally that connection, whether it be belonging, relationships, whatever it is, that does, definitely feed into our ability to cope with things that come our way and our mental well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing that really struck me about the importance of belonging was around that necessity to really find those opportunities to think about those protective and preventative approaches, and being intentional about doing so giving people the opportunity to explore those skills that they might learn through that belonging in those spaces. So I wondered because there was a lot in the chat, and obviously it's going to develop the resource that we mentioned around those practical strategies, but from both of your experiences, what are some of the practical strategies that might be employed or you've seen work well to sort of create those opportunities to strengthen belonging?
Well, I think for me, having a welcoming environment is, which again taps into a bit about that sense about occupation, person, environment.
Definitely.
But, to walk into a place where you feel like, we want you to be here. And I know people's experiences might be different, but for me, I know when my son went from childcare to school, it was like you leave them at the school gate, where at childcare, I was much more involved, and a bit like the university example. And I'm generalising, obviously, but to have an environment where you feel like you can actually go past the school gate or, into the uni and have a conversation, I think is really important about feeling like I can
see myself here. I'm welcome to belong.
Yeah, I mean, I think about, we talk about early childhood education and care, right? And it's because those two things actually have a really strong relationship. And we say sometimes, you know, care is the curriculum, right? And so again, you know, thinking about the wonderful work that so many infant and toddler educators do around really treating caregiving routines. We might think of them as rituals, right? So, you know, meal times, nappy changes, rest times, right? As opportunities to really slow down, to invite cooperation and participation, and to build that sense of connection and belonging. And you can think about that again, right, in terms of a kind of attachment model, right? Those are the kinds of ways we fill children's tank, or we fill children's cup, so that they can then go out and do more of that self-directed, self-driven play.
Yeah, no, that all sounds good. And Keen, if there's any questions to come through, that you pop those into the chat. Let's move on to another topic. So the next thing to discuss is around exploring how going beyond self-care can build capacity in our diverse learning communities. And one of the things that really stood out for me in this space was around, you know, culture is everything, which then ties back to your belonging, the enjoyment that you'll get in your space, and the benefits, and the role of that, you know, the leadership in sort of developing that culture and setting that tone. And I was thinking about that in reflection of our new Educator Wellbeing Guide, which is a leadership tool, but it is really inclusive to be used with all of the team that's at the school or early learning service, because it is around collecting the information from the people working in that environment to say, what is it that you need? What is it that you feel we need to do? What should we as a collective look at for that whole of learning community approach? So yeah, keen for your reflections.
It's interesting for me. I was also quite fascinated about the importance of words and having a shared understanding about what words mean. Not that there's a right or wrong definition, but there's a shared understanding. And I'm thinking, Geri, you know, when you talk about the wellbeing plan, that is another way of making sure that you have a shared language in your learning community around what does this look like for us. So, you know, that was the thing that I took from it, was the importance of language.
And I think it's also sort of, along with the language comes the conversation. And it's that conversation prompt that, well, if if we're talking in the right language, you can have the right conversation.
I also, Geri, had the Educator Wellbeing Guide kind of playing in the back of my mind throughout today. Because one of the themes of that guide, and it's a theme I think of so many of today's sessions, right, is that educator well-being is an individual benefit, but it's also a social responsibility. It's a collective responsibility. And it really is both things, right? And I think Dr. Kellyanne and the panel did a really good job of establishing that the individual is still important, right? There are things that only I can do to take care of my own well-being. But we can also think collectively, and we can think about what our responsibilities are to one another, such that when things get hard, we kind of get through them together. And I'm glad that you mentioned leaders and leadership, right? Because you don't stop being a human being when you become a leader, right? You still have well-being needs. And I think it's really important that we talk about leaders' well-being and prioritize it. I love that Julia Gillard talked about saying no. My experience of being a service director, and this would certainly be true of, you know, school principals and people in leadership positions in schools, is that the job never finishes, right? There's always something more to do. But, you know, if Julia Gillard can say no, then I can probably say no too, right? So that boundary setting, I think, is a really important thing to think about.
And I think, you know, one of the challenges I've experienced, and I'm sure I'm not alone, is when you're a leader, you feel like you can't be as necessarily open around your own well-being needs.
Gets to the modeling, right?
And, you know, I can't, you know, you might feel like you can't say I'm having a shitty day today and I need your support because you've got this leadership badge on. But in actual fact, to be a good leader, you know,
a little bit of vulnerability doesn't hurt, does it?
Well, it creates that authorizing environment, I think, where your team then goes, okay, it's okay to say, I'm not doing so well, I need some help.
Yeah, definitely. One of the other things that came up through through that educator wellbeing session as well was around the BU surveys and how they might be used within a school or early learning service. So what do you hear from your consultants around the benefits of the use of the surveys?
Yeah, well, you know, the other thing I've been thinking about, and this is a bit of a, I was going to say obsession, maybe it's a bit of a key concept in BU, right, is implementation, right? Yeah. And implementation is about saying, you can't actually just wake up tomorrow, decide that you want to make change in terms of, you know, mental health in your learning community and snap your fingers and expect great results, right? But there are actually things that are evidence supported that we know have a pretty good shot of increasing your chances of making change that's not only positive change, right, but that's sustainable over time. And often that process starts with gathering really good information about your learning community. If you don't ask young people what drives their sense of belonging, you might not know how important your role as an educator, as a teacher is, right? So I think surveys are such a great tool in those early stages, as you start to think about change and implement change, to figure out what your needs are, what your goals are, what barriers and enablers you might face. And it gives you something that you can come back to over time. It gives you this snapshot that's really helpful in terms of setting measures of success and, revisiting later.
I certainly know in the school environment they're used frequently for very similar reasons, obviously. So I agree with you. You know, one of the strengths of the BU initiative is obviously the evidence base, and the survey is another example of an evidence base. It's an evidence base for your learning community. And you use that in conjunction with all the other resources that are available with BU, then you've got a great foundation to start on.
Absolutely. It's around that gathering that initial data, isn't it? And anything that's data informed is going to give you outcomes that are actually reflective of your needs at the time. So absolutely agree. Well, I'm going to move on to the next topic, which was around resilience. And I loved the resilience of Caroline in that session. So apologies for the technical challenges that we had there. But seeing sort of the comments coming through in the chat saying, I've missed some crucial information at the start, we need to see this. It was lovely to then see you all reflect that had worked well for us to sort of reset that session and show Caroline sort of going back through the information that was critical to the understanding. So reflecting on resilience and what it means for educators, again, I think a lot of this came down to words in this session for me. And resilience is one of those words, as was being described, that some people really resonated with and some people got very turned off from. And there was one thing that that was said in here was, are we talking about bouncing back, or is it better to talk about moving forwards? And I really love that concept. So I'm going to reflect on that a little bit myself. But interested in what your thoughts were.
I thought that was a really good kind of conversation about bouncing back, because it is, we don't always want to go back to where we were, because we're about learning and moving forward, and whatever that might look like for people will be different. But I actually thought, yes, you're absolutely right. Are we trying to do what we've always done, which in some ways can be stagnant, not current, all of those sorts of things. I am definitely triggered by the word resilience.
Oh, me too.
I don't know why, but it's just that I think through the COVID, it was used so often in so many different contexts that it sort of lost a common understanding of what the word was for me. And so that's why I kind of react to it. But yes, I thought that was really, again, important to think about. That's actually a personal response for me. And if I'm a leader, I need to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I think Carolyn's word cloud was such a good kind of empathetic exercise. I'm a bit like you. When I hear resilience, I hear put up and for it, you know what I mean? And so it's interesting, again, to go back to some of the definitions of well-being in our well-being guide, for example, because well-being is not the absence of sadness or adversity, right? Because those things are parts of life. It's the ability to cope, to, you know, absorb those experiences kind of into your story, right?
Yeah.
And to tilt towards optimism and towards hope. Yeah.
And I had another one with that was from that session that said you can build resilience and be resilient, but still experience stress.
Yeah.
And I think it's really
Absolutely.
important to recognize that, because it's not that you're living this lovely stress-free life.
Yes.
It's that you know, you've got these strategies that are at play to support you through those times as well. I also loved the occupational therapy model that was put forward, the PEO model. I think that's something that is really helpful to think about. And you know, thinking about the person, those personal qualities to build resilience, but then those environmental needs and benefits to build resilience, and then what is it that you're doing? What is it those what's occupying your time? And I think having that description as well around, you know, occupational therapies around what's occupying your time
Whatever you do.
was really helpful. Really helpful. So yes, so keen to hear your thoughts on any of the three aspects of that PEO model, and any strategies that you've got at play or thought about from today.
I thought it was very accessible. You know, I liked the model as
Yeah.
well. It kind of resonated with me straight away without me having to think about it, you know. And I think it tapped back into one of the things that I think has been happening today, which is really around well-being being layered or holistic, or, you know, it's not just about you as an individual, it's about the culture in which you work in, it's about the sectors and structures that we operate within, like it's broader than that. And I think for me that model would help me think about not just myself, or not just, it would help me actively think about those other areas, being more holistic.
And again, it comes back to, you know, what we really talk to a lot in BU is around the whole of the learning community approach. And I think that model gives you the opportunity for that whole of learning community approach to resilience as a concept. But then also thinking about, you know, the person in this, that's where, again, you can collect data from your entire community to tell you those sort of things that we can work on as people, as a collective within our environment as well. I thought that was interesting to think about.
And those drivers of resilience that Caroline shared, they're so resonant with the things we know that build belonging, that build well-being, right? I used to work with this wonderful educator, and she'd say, children are resilient, right? And sometimes we say children are resilient in this kind of glib way when, you know, something goes wrong, or, you know, we don't think about our transitions very thoughtfully, and, you know, children come and go, or they get stuck waiting, we go, oh, you know, children are resilient. And she'd say, you know, children are resilient, but children's resilience is a precious resource, so don't abuse it, right? And I thought about that when Caroline was talking about the danger of, you know, when we say, oh, that child's so resilient, right? Because there's some assumptions in that, right? What we might actually be saying is that child doesn't show their emotions in the way that I expect. There's probably some cultural assumptions we might want to think about. You know, thinking about the way experiences of trauma or adversity might have impact on, you know, the way we show emotion or our affect. So I thought that part of it was really interesting and really practical too.
And again, the importance of the educator.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
You know, in picking those things up, or consciously thinking, yes, this child seems to bounce back all the time, for want of a better word, but you know, what's that about? Let's dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also with that, it was resonating when Caroline was talking about, you know, she likes to talk things out. And I thought, yep, that's me as well. But I think reflecting on what your needs are, because you talked about, you know, your responses, but your needs as well. And what do you need to be able to support your resilience in those, in, you know, in the different circumstances that we might face. So, Louis, what are some of the things that you need?
I need to build my resilience. Well, first of all, I really appreciated that message, and it came up in the panel as well, because I think it connects to the idea of professional autonomy, right? mindfulness, yoga, bowling, whatever, these might be wonderful ways to build team culture. They're not going to be for everybody, right? And so, a very simple thing that we can do, we're starting to get comments, fantastic. A very simple thing we can do is to make sure that we really frame these initiatives as invitations and not as mandates, right? Should we read some of this great feedback we're getting?
You can go, Louis.
So we've got Carmen is talking about the human side of being a leader. Yeah, again, I think that's really important. I love to learn about more resilient techniques and teach the children to become more resilient in difficult situations. That's from Falsi.
It was interesting because I was thinking about the kind of well-being and thinking about some of that call to action, which will come up more tomorrow, but thinking about that in the context of the RAP and the Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander community, and I was thinking you could argue that we have to heal there first, like that's our beginning, and if we then embrace that and have a greater understanding of that, then that should actually help us.
Yeah, where can we move to?
Yeah,
fantastic. So I think we can summarise and say that today's session has clearly given us all food for thought. We hope that's been the same for all of you out there in the audience as well. And I'm going to give us a little bit of a précis around what we're going to see tomorrow. So first, we've got another fabulous opening keynote. We've got Rebecca Ray joining us, and I'm really excited for this session. She's going to be talking to us around empowered boundaries for educators. And I think boundaries are something that we all need to be very mindful of and all be thinking about. So I know Rebecca's going to give us a fantastic session to kick off tomorrow. And then tomorrow really is all around those practical strategies. So again, sort of turning what we learn into action and getting some outcomes from what we've gone through with our professional development. So tomorrow is going to be run a little bit differently. We're going to have different streams for early learning services and schools. Some of the topics again is some of our sub-themes of the conference. We've got sessions on educator wellbeing. We've got towards resilience, so reflections from disaster impacted communities, and we've got new professional learning modules on natural disasters and recovery, etc. within BU for you to all enjoy as well. We've got a couple of sessions around inclusion. One is called Walk With Me, and the other one is around supporting neurodiversity and disability inclusion. So again, some fantastic sessions coming up tomorrow that we hope you all enjoy. If you want to think about what next from today, so what to do from here as well, we'd love for you to connect with your BU consultant. As we said, our BU consultants, they're the point of difference for our initiative. We're there to answer your questions. Our consultant workforce is absolutely incredible. They're a font of knowledge, and they know all about everything that we're talking about in spades. Definitely like nuance to your individual settings as well. So please tap into our consultants. Our consultants do lead BU implementation sessions, so that's where you can have conversations to ask about, your implementation activities around BU, but also to have conversations around specific topics that have come up. So, for example, in early learning, we might be talking about looking at how BU and wellbeing links into national quality frameworks. We might be looking in schools around school refusal, which has been raising its head at the moment, around self-harm in primary schools. So we've got some really great topics for you to tap into there as well. And of course, on our website, we've got all of our planning and implementation tools, and that's everything from our surveys that we mentioned, and right through to some fact sheets and other resources you can look for. We've got plenty that you can do to learn more about BU. You can register as a whole learning community to receive that more response, and that's more than the individual learning about BU. And you can tap into all of our resources that we said, but also tap into our socials. We've got socials, as you can see, listed there. We've also got a brand new Instagram channel. So please follow us and see our information and see the different information that's tapped across some of the different streams across early learning and primary and secondary schools. So we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you, everybody, for your input into today, all of your questions, all of your comments. As I said, we'll get back to you with some individual comments as well from questions that have been asked. Look forward to consolidating some of the information that you've seen into some resources for you. Most of all, we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow as well. So please stay tuned and we'll see you back tomorrow. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks, everyone.